I guarantee if the man that I stabbed was alive today, he would be on that field, either coaching or he would be working the concession stand. He could be just about anywhere and do anything because he doesn't have the label that I had. And that irritates me and that frustrates me because he would be free and I wouldn't have. I don't have a future in that.
Hello, and welcome to Invading the Darkness, stories from the fight against child sex trafficking, featuring Linda Smith, the founder of Shared Hope International. Join Linda as she shares stories from her 23 years of fighting the battle of domestic minor sex trafficking. Our desire is that each episode of Invading the Darkness will help you understand the importance of fighting child sex trafficking, as well as equip you to join in that fight. This episode is part 2 in a 3-part series where Linda continues sharing Yvonne's story. You will hear from both Linda and Yvonne, a former trafficking victim. While the story is difficult to listen to, it provides important insights into how traffickers groom their victims and what action steps are needed to eliminate these horrific crimes.
Welcome, Yvonne, and thank you for everything you've done to help other girls and boys and being there for them and for Shared Hope, and helping me personally to really understand what trafficking looks like. Yvonne.
Well, thank you, Linda. So yes, I do remember my 13th birthday, not with good memories. My friends and I were supposed to head to the park to celebrate. However, I realized right away that they were not my friends. When we had gotten there, the door came open and my stepdad pulled me out of the back seat. And I was taken home, and I was actually severely sick, wasn't really feeling good. And so he used that to his advantage. And so just having me back at the house, he just had me in the basement and would do what he needed to keep me there and to control me, whether it was with sleeping pills or other means. I remember one time being tied up with a phone cord because my stepdad and mom had to go visit my sister. And so as long as they had me in control, there was a possibility that they could get custody of my sister again and my brother. So that was a really scary time for me because I didn't really have anywhere to go. I couldn't really escape. And just life got real for me. So my bedroom was on the mattress on the floor in my my stepdad's room, and he would bring his friends to come use me. Eventually I did end up pregnant, and all through the pregnancy my stepdad vowed to kill my baby if it was not his. And while giving birth to my son, he was breech, and my stepdad pulled him out, and he related it to cattle because I guess he grew up on a farm. And so I'm scared giving birth to, I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. And, just realizing that I had to do whatever I needed to do to make sure that this baby was safe. And my stepdad's name was Ed, and his street name was Gypsy Joe. So I named my son Eddie Joe. So that way my stepdad had some kind of pride with him, because obviously we both knew that my son was not his. He was white, where my stepdad was dark complected. And so he received my son with the name Eddie Joe. And so now I have my son that I need to watch out for. And so, of course, I was more compliant with my stepdad. However, hiding in a house with a crying baby is really hard to do. And again, my parents are trying to get custody back of my little sister and my brother. So there's home visits that happen. So in April, I was moved to Las Vegas, and my son and I was placed with my stepdad's sister. And I ended up running. They had a St. Vincent de Paul there with a work center. And so I was able to get like a ID with a different name on it, and obviously different age, so that I could find legitimate work. I ended up moving in with a pastor and his wife, and the pastor owned like a telemarketing company. So I was able to work for them during the day. And in my mind, I was free because I had found a way to run. I had to trust the place that I was living to take care of my son, which was hard, but I trusted them because it was a pastor and his wife. And when I had confided in them about my real story, the authorities were called because nobody wanted to be responsible for a runaway girl with a child. And my son was taken to Child Haven, and I was put in the juvenile hall. So I was treated like a criminal, even though I hadn't done anything wrong but run away. I was separated from my son. And that was really hard because I didn't know if he was eating, if he was sleeping, if he missed me. I know that I missed him. And that was just a really hard experience for me because for the first time in my life, something that I loved, that I know loved me back, and we were separated. And I couldn't care for him. And all I had done is protect him from the day that he was born. Even before he was born, I did whatever I could to protect him. So my son and I were moved to Washington State. A caseworker came down to Las Vegas to get us. And my son was put into foster care, and I was placed into a group home. So still we were separated, and I really didn't have an understanding of that. I don't want to say that I blame the justice system or that they were wrong in what they did, because I actually do believe in the foster care system. I just honestly feel that they didn't have enough information for girls like me or children like me at that time. So they couldn't handle anything appropriately, you know? And we've definitely come a long ways in our system with the knowledge of what domestic minor sex trafficking is, whether it's familial, whether it's obviously gang or a girl that's in need. There's definitely a lot more knowledge of what it is. However, in 95, there just was not. I was already categorized as a troubled teen, a runaway, an angry child. So just the labels that were put on me, I was an unfit mother for my child. That hurt because I felt that I was the best thing for my son when I did the best that I could to provide for him and keep him safe. So at some point, I was taken out of the group home and put into a foster home. Me and the foster mom did not get along well. She always told me that, I couldn't be super mom. I was 15 years old. I can't raise a child. I was a child myself. I needed to give my son up for adoption, that he was in a really good home and that he needed to stay there because those people were real parents and they could raise him. And that would be the best decision that I could do. I endured a lot of abuse in that foster home, whether it was verbal and towards the end, very physical. But I stayed because I wanted my son. So I complied with the state on everything and anything they asked me to do because I felt if I complied, I could get my son back. Ultimately, though, I did end up signing documents and letting my son be adopted out with the family he was with. I didn't abandon my son. What I feel I did was the ultimate sacrifice that any parent could do was to release my son to be raised by people that could raise him, that were real parents, that loved him as much as I did. And I firmly believed that I did the most selfless thing that I could have ever done, and that was to adopt my son out. After I had signed the paperwork for my son to be adopted, things really heated up in the foster home that I was in. Basically, I had nothing else to fight for. And my foster mom was in my face, and she didn't like my attitude. She ended up putting a cigarette out on my hand, and we got into a fight. Of course, the cops were called, and I remember asking the foster dad, "Are you going to tell the truth?" And he said that it wouldn't matter, that I was just a kid and nobody believes a kid. So I got all of my belongings and I left. In a way, I'll never forget that statement. It's haunted me ever since. Maybe it was my answer as to why. Why wasn't I rescued or saved? Why wasn't I believed? Because if I was believed, maybe the authorities would have done something different. At least that's how TV presented it. Also, it stuck with me because at that moment on, I had never really said my side of any story. Whatever anybody said, I just went along with it because after all, no one was going to believe a kid. So I was 15 and angry, feeling betrayed, completely numb, lost, alone. All hope was gone. And again, I had nothing to fight for, and I lost it. I wandered, I stayed in vacant homes, IV drug use. I did any and everything to stay heavily medicated to escape my life. Of course, every now and then I would find myself in a bind where men would want sex. And for me, I would just split into somebody else and I would just do it. And then just go on about living my life like nothing ever happened. Most of the time, though, I was really good to get out of awkward situations. And I definitely had no respect for the male species. They had always disgusted me. I always had this tough persona and I played the part well. I had values and morals, and as long as I had those, I was still human. When I was on the streets, every now and then I would be asked if I wanted to make a little extra money by doing services in hotels room. Of course, I would decline. My stepdad always told me that the only way a woman could make a living on the streets is by selling herself. And I did everything I could to prove him wrong. In April of 97, I was 16 years old. I came out of a Denny's restaurant off Kitsap. Sober and cold, and it was raining. I'm in jeans and a coat with a hoodie and a backpack. Always a backpack. I was wearing either a leather jacket or a jean jacket. It was either one or the other. Anyways, it's raining, and this red maroon car, maybe a Cadillac, pulls up. The man was old, and I can tell, shaky hand and a cane in the back, he seemed harmless. He asked if I needed a ride. I said, well, I'm going to the mall. He said he could take me. So I said, okay, and I got in the car. As he was driving on the freeway, he was pulling down my shirt. I'm brushing his hand away. I'm feeling just icky, very uncomfortable. And he keeps groping and clawing and putting his hand on my leg to my crotch. And I keep brushing it away. And I'm thinking if I just stay calm, he'll just stop. Really, it just seemed to excite him more. Almost fueled him. Really, it was mostly just him pulling down my shirt. And when we took the exit for the mall, instead of going straight, he went left. I asked him where we were going, but by the time it came out of my mouth, we were already pulling into a driveway, into his garage. I got out of the car and I bolted to the front door. But it was double key bolted on both sides, so I was really locked in. I turned around and he was undoing his belt. He punched me in the face, and then he took his boxer stance, and I remember him saying something about being a Golden Glove boxer. I seriously was at a loss. He continued grabbing at me. He punched me again, and I did not lose my balance, but I was obviously really wobbly. I went back to the garage. He continued to rough me up, and I was unable to really think except for to maybe pull my little knife out that I'd carried with me. He was like, okay, well, I'll take you back. And the whole time, all I was thinking was that I was actually about to be raped. Not used, not given away, but raped. As I got back into the car, I put the knife under my leg, so I basically sat on it so that I could have easy access to it. We both drove back towards the freeway, and I remember him pulling over a little bit, and I thought this is where he was gonna, let me out. And I went to reach for the door handle, and he locked it, so it was automatic locks. And at that time, I didn't even know that a car could do that, And I remember turning towards him, and he was like, you're not going anywhere. And he slapped me and drove. And at that time, my knife came out, and I just went straight forward with my arm. And he completed the U-turn all at the same time. He unlocked the car, and he came out of the car, and the car rolled to a stop by some railroad tracks. And he's on the ground, and traffic is stopped. I get out of the car, and all I can yell was, He wouldn't leave me alone. He wouldn't leave me alone. And it was just chaos. And then I remember just kind of walking away and then just running. Cops were called and people were freaking out, and I just wanted out of there. Eventually I got picked up by another vehicle, and, I was just gone. Now, however, the cops actually did end up finding me, of course. And I did go in willingly. They knew I was high at the time that they picked me up, and I was sitting in juvenile cell with a blanket over me, and a female officer is coming in with 2 other officers, and they just moved in too fast, and I panicked and I fought. They ended up taking me to the hospital to see what drugs I was on and how much was in my system. When we got there, a nurse got into my face and she said, "You're going to do a lot of time for what you did, bitch." And I lost it. I was triggered. I ended up hitting her. And of course, I realize now that, a nurse working at the hospital, she obviously knew the man, and he was being held at that hospital. And all I can assume is that she was just doing what she thought she knew, And so it just really sticks in my head of the thoughts of how people perceived things then by using language of teenage prostitute. And again, how people listen to the language now and perceive things of teenage prostitute, because the word is still being used and it's not correct. When I was moved to the adult jail, I had a lawyer that was not really working for me. He had told me that 6 prostitutes came to him saying that the John liked paying more to beat them up. It didn't matter though, it was election year. They wanted to use me as an example, teach me a lesson. I was looking at 26 to 36 years in prison for murder, but I needed to sign the plea agreement for 5 years for first-degree manslaughter. And of course, that's what I did. Adult time, 5 years for manslaughter, because my case did not stand a chance of winning in court. I think if I was standing up, I probably would have passed out. I'll never forget the feeling. I was lightheaded. I was red, just feeling hot. I remember hearing my heart beating in my ears, very loud, very uncomfortable, obviously. My attorney said I had no choice. If I took it to trial, we would lose. And when I did get to prison for check-in, I remember one tear rolling down my face. And at that moment, I said, I will never cry again. And I will just continue to be strong.
Well, Yvonne, thank you. It's really hard. I think I'll tell some more of the story, give you a little rest. It takes a lot of courage to tell your story, but Yvonne has helped save a lot of lives in understanding what goes on behind the doors with these children, on the streets with these children, in the strip clubs with these children. She can help us understand the emotions of the child. Well, I think I'm going to ask all of you a question, and it's kind of hard. Was their defense attorney right in pleading her out? Now, you're not going to answer this out loud or send me notes. Some of you might, and that's okay. But let me finish, and then I'd love to hear from you. Would the attorney, I guess you could say, was he right that the jury would have seen her as the little bitch, the prostitute? Hard words, but in the minds of that jury, was he right? Now let's go to the press for just a moment. So you'll understand the environment she was in. You'll find some of this language in the press today. In fact, some of the language has been used for current cases in the headlines. But it shows the bias of the culture. Not long ago, the headline in Phoenix, Arizona, in a back page trial, used teen prostitute to describe a witness that was trafficked online on the Backpage website. But not to go to that right now. We still have nearly 24 states where a child can be arrested, even if they have a trafficking law in all of them. And that is that old bias in the law. A law where the prostitution law, including children, was put into law many, many years ago that allows them to be arrested. The same law that doesn't apply to men. Well, we need to get rid of the law that would prosecute or arrest a child and make sure the men go to jail that are buying these children. Well, I think I would just like to explain some of the headlines, some of the things I found about Yvonne, because I wasn't there. I was in Congress when she was trafficked, and I was actually working on some issues around trafficking of organs, children, babies, but it wasn't the same, and I didn't realize what our own state of Washington's law did. Well, in the first paragraph of one of the first pieces published in her hometown where this all happened, the headline of the day was "Teenage Girl Arrested in Stabbing an Elderly Man." When you go to the first paragraph, and that's usually where they're going to catch you, and you're going to read that one, the word prostitute. Now, it does say someone where in here suspected prostitute, but they say in the article she's a suspected murderer of an elderly man. Now, this could have said a man is accused of raping a teenager or maybe attacking a teenage girl. All of those are facts that were known. And he was charged with trafficking, although at that point, that state still just had a misdemeanor for the buyer and a prosecution for the child being prostituted. But you see, the perception of prostitution is strong. Now, we've been back in her county. She and I met with the officials, and that county's laws and practice of laws are rocky. They're doing well. They've come and sent people to the Shared Hope Just Juvenile Sex Trafficking Conference practically every year for 8-9 years, maybe even before that. They've got training. They've developed a court. They do all kinds of things, and they're helping to actually dig out a record. We've got everything that could be found that wasn't destroyed because in this time, she was also considered a child. Kind of a double-edged sword, things not made public when people needed to understand that he was raping this child. Well, I think we're making headway. And as we talked about the Kansas case and the 13, 14-year-old girls earlier in an earlier episode, the bottom line was that a man had ordered them into his home and came upon a strong jury. Who knew? And he ended up getting all the way to sentencing. And the judge said, "I do find the victims in this case in particular were more an aggressor." The long and the short of that is, he said, the 13-year-old took her top off and she's doing things she was paid for. And he did not really think he had much sympathy for her, but he did for the buyer and dropped the sentence substantially. And I go, we've got a long way to go. Sometimes training helps that. Sometimes just having a strong public understand that some people shouldn't be judges if they have that bias. So I ask you about the bias inside your heart, but I think most of us have changed. You're on because you're starting to understand, and we're trying to deal from a point of today. These kids are victims of crimes. They're not aggressors. They might even be angry, but to take them to court for the things that have happened to them and they survived is wrong. We have to, in all states, take the kids out of the prostitution law altogether, take them out of the commercial sexual exploitation of children's law as criminals, and fix the biggie. If there weren't men buying, there wouldn't be these children being brought to them. You wouldn't be giving up your daughters if you weren't giving a pass to the men buying children. We don't let kids be run over in the streets because of an adult negligence. We shouldn't let them be run over in the life of commercial sex. So thank you again, Yvonne. I'd like her to come back now. And we're going to, over a period, talk about the report cards to the states, but in real life conditions. Why do we have to do these things in law of the states and federal government? Why does Shared Hope put so much effort into drafting laws for the states and helping them get changed and working on federal laws. Because without a law, you can't practice law. And with a vacuum or confusion in the laws, the person that falls through the hole of what should be a net of justice is the youth. We need to defend them and we need to stand for them. But yeah, I do consider you, Yvonne, one of my girls, and I always will. I am older than you, gosh. But I'm very proud of her and just absolutely amazed at her strength. So tell us just a little more about where you are today, some things happening. We've talked about your life. Talk about the good stuff so they'll see that there is a way, and it's a hard way, but you did it. And I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Linda. I definitely have always looked up to you, and I've learned a lot from you, and I've always admired you, and I'll be grateful for you. So, especially working together for something I'm so passionate about is definitely an honor. Of course, it doesn't always feel good, but it's not supposed to. So, well, today I am a mother of 2 teenage girls, both in high school. I own a home finally, and my husband and I share a small business, and it's definitely been rewarding of where I am today as opposed to where I've come from, because I'm a statistics that does not exist. And I know there's others out there like me that just would not give up. They don't accept no for an answer, and they just keep pressing on and moving forward. However, I can't say that I've always had these things, of course. I had to fight really hard for them, probably harder than most people. I had to fix my credit. I had to build credit. I had to get out of debt. I had to do a lot of schooling, and I had to let a lot of time pass so that I could be accepted. And what I mean by that is, if 10 years have passed, people are more apt to look at your history, your criminal history, and say, oh, well, this person's changed, as opposed to looking at your criminal history, even if there is a viable reason why you have that criminal history, people are still blinded because they want to say, well, we still can't do anything for you because of that history. So I have actually moved states away from where I've come from, completely had a restart, got out of debt, paid dearly for that to get out of debt. And most of the debt wasn't even mine. It was hard to get a bank account at first because I had criminal charges in my past, and I had, just debt. I didn't have good credit. And even being in my mid-20s, you would think that I should be able to get a credit card or, a bank account. I mean, if it wasn't for the state putting me in a PIC program and they had an agreement with US Bank, that's how I was able to get a bank card and get a bank account. And then I established some kind of credit because I paid for my own credit card and used it as a gas card. By chance, I found these other loopholes that were just kind of opened opportunities for me to be able to build a future, And so now I have 10 years under my belt of a good crediting report, and I have 10 years under my belt of a good criminal record. I don't even have a speeding ticket. So it allowed me to be able to buy a home. It allowed me to run a small business, and I don't have to worry about anybody, tagging my name and saying, oh, well, we don't want to do business with them because we know who they are. My past really is my past, but that's because time passed. And so it could be really hard, I could see, for other survivors that aren't as strong as I am or stubborn as I am. Stubbornness really could work for your benefit and be a strength if used correctly, Here I am today, and I do a lot of work with Linda, not just to raise awareness for the community on the realness of what trafficking is, but also for the survivor to know that you can make it, you can succeed, your past does not define you, and you can have a future and build a very positive future. But it takes work. It takes counseling. It takes doctor's visits. It takes medical care. It takes a support group, which is what Shared Hope did for me when I got into the WIN program. They supported me. They lifted me up when I didn't think I was worthy enough to be lifted up. They loved on me until I could love myself. It was really rewarding to be in a healthy environment so that I could grow and mature and be who I am today. And if it wasn't for that foundation that was established for me, I honestly don't know where I would be today. I had found that utility bills were put into my name, and obviously the bills were never paid. It just ran until they turned the power off, but that was in the thousands. And so multiple utility and cell phone companies were put into my name, and the bills were just ran up and never paid. And so having something like that on your record is a huge strike. I was very fortunate, though, that a car was never bought in my name. There are stories about that, and that is damaging to your credit. I've actually helped my husband rebuild his credit and a few friends, just because I know the ins and outs of crediting, and talking to creditors can be scary and intimidating. But even medical bills were racked up.
That weren't yours, or?
No, some of them were mine. Some of them probably were not mine, because I have no idea where these counties were with my name, and I'd never been to those particular counties. But some of them were obviously mine because they came out of the counties I was in. But, you know, having a broken wrist, I had to go in for that. And of course, that goes on my credit report. And you would think that medical bills, you hear the story that medical bills don't really hurt your credit, that people don't look at that. However, when it gets bought and paid for from other crediting companies, it gets washed out as a medical bill as time goes on. So when it is on your credit report, it doesn't look like a medical bill. It looks like just a bill, and it's damaging. It hurts the person's credit. It hurts their scores. It hurts everything. So trying to come back from that takes time, a lot of money. And a lot of places, especially back then, they wouldn't work with you if it wasn't yours. I had taken a lot of crediting classes being in job skills training. The crediting classes are in line with that, because a lot of jobs, when they do the background checks, they're also checking your credit, which is odd, but that's what they do. They want to know who they're hiring. So even getting into housing, they do the background checks and they do credit reports. So if you have horrible credit, how are you supposed to get into safe housing? And what I mean by safe housing is because you can go to almost any town and there is a poor neighborhood that has slumlords that doesn't care as long as they're getting paid about the housing, but you have to also live in an environment that they're not going to fix anything. They don't feel that they're bound by any housing rules or laws. And really, for the price you're paying, you don't really have anything to complain about, but it's not safe. So how are you supposed to get safe housing or live in a safe environment coming out of being trafficked when you have no credit, no good credit, or anything like that? So there really is a hindrance put on survivors even today because of their credit or their background. So even though I own a home, my credit's great. Most backgrounds I can pretty much overcome because there's such a time lapse there. And I've proven that, you know, I'm a great person. The thing is it still follows me. So I can't volunteer at my kids' school. Both my girls are in band. So they do the halftime show for football on Friday nights. And I cannot volunteer to work at the concession stands, and they need volunteers. And I would be a great volunteer for them. However, because of my criminal background, they do the background check. I would not be approved. I also don't want to embarrass my children because of my background. So if the schools find out about it, I live in a small town that, yes, most people do know about my background. I'm very open and honest and transparent about it. But when you see it on paper and I'm being denied access, that turns it into a whole nother ball game that I'm just not prepared for, and I don't want to ruin my children's future in that way. So there's still that biased thinking. And both my girls love the work that I do. They're very proud of who I am today. They're proud to call me their mom, but they also understand that I will go to any game and support them in the stands, but I just can't volunteer with their school and with their after-school curricular activities. And that breaks my heart, because I guarantee if the man that I stabbed was alive today, he would be on that field either coaching, or he would be working the concession stand. He could be just about anywhere and do anything, because he doesn't have the label that I had. And that irritates me and that frustrates me, because he would be free and I wouldn't have. I don't have a future in that.
Thank you for listening to Invading the Darkness, stories from the fight against child sex trafficking. If you would like to learn how you can help put an end to child sex trafficking, please visit sharedhope.org/take action. New episodes of Invading the Darkness are released every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating as well as a written review. Join us in episode 7 as we conclude part 3 of Yvonne's story.